Why was she adjusting that patch again? 5 times now. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell caught herself doing it, fingers tracing the medic insignia stitched to her sleeve, the same patch she'd earned in blood, sand, and sleepless nights. And yet, here she was, fidgeting with it like a nervous recruit. The Afghan sun hit hard that morning, pouring over forward operating base Condor like molten gold. The air shimmered above the tarmac, and the smell of diesel, sweat, and scorched earth blended into that familiar scent of war and waiting. Around her, soldiers moved with precision, carrying crates, checking weapons, running drills, each one focused, hardened. But this place was different. This was where the elite trained, the 7th Special Operations Medical Unit. They didn't just patch wounds, they saved lives in places where seconds separated heroes from body bags. 3 weeks. That's how long Sarah had been here. 3 weeks since she'd stepped into this proving ground where 50 candidates had started and less than half remained. Now only 20 stood, and soon that number would shrink again. Her pulse quickened as she stood in formation, boots aligned perfectly on the dusty parade ground. Sweat slid down her back, but she didn't move, not even to wipe it away. The man packing before them didn't tolerate weakness, not even the kind born of heat or exhaustion. Colonel William Mitchell. No relation, despite the name. Though Sarah sometimes wished the shared surname meant something more than coincidence, the colonel had made it painfully clear it did not. He was a legend in the ranks, the kind of man whose voice could silence a room before he even spoke. Weathered face, eyes like cold steel, posture carved from decades of war. They called him Iron Will, not because of his strength but because he never bent, not for anyone, not for anything. When his gaze swept over the candidates, Sarah felt it land on her longer than anyone else. "And stay there." "Mitchell," he barked. Her spine straightened instinctively. "Front and center." She moved, boots hitting the ground with precision. The silence around her deepened. She stood at attention, chin high, the medic patch still warm under her fingers. Colonel Mitchell studied her, the faintest smirk touching the corner of his mouth. "Today begins Phase 2, he said, voice carrying across the open field like the crack of a rifle. "Medical skill alone won't save you or your team in hostile territory. Today, we find out who can survive when everything goes wrong." A murmur ran through the line. The colonel ignored it. "Your unit is ambushed during a medevac. Your transport is down. You have wounded on the ground and hostiles closing in. You'll be evaluated on tactical decisions, weapons proficiency, and medical care under extreme duress. Fail to adapt and you're out. Fail your patient." He paused, the silence was suffocating. "And they die." Sarah swallowed, eyes fixed forward. She could feel the weight of the colonel's stare pressing against her, measuring, judging. At 5'6" and lean, she didn't fit the image of a typical operator, but that never mattered to her. What mattered was calm under pressure, precision when others panicked, heart when others broke. Behind the colonel stood several instructors, all from different elite units. Rangers, pararescue, Green Berets, even a woman in a flight suit, Lieutenant Colonel Meryl Tangisdal, a legendary pilot known for landing helicopters in impossible conditions. Her presence here was unusual. It meant this wasn't just another exercise. When the colonel dismissed the candidates, the air filled with motion, gear checks, murmured prayers, the metallic clicks of magazines locking into place. Sarah crouched by her rucksack, standard issue M4 carbine, sidearm, tactical medical kit strapped to her thigh, comms earpiece. Non-lethal training rounds, though non-lethal didn't mean painless. She ran her thumb along the edge of her patch again, not out of nerves this time, but focus. Habit turned ritual. A shadow fell across her. "Lieutenant Mitchell." Sarah looked up. Lieutenant Colonel Tangisdal stood there, flight gloves tucked into her belt, expression unreadable. "Ma'am," Sarah said, standing. Tangisdal's gaze was sharp, assessing. Word of advice. Colonel Mitchell isn't just testing your skill today, he's testing your resolve. Sarah nodded once. Understood, ma'am. But Tangisdal didn't move. He'll push you harder than the others, maybe because of your name, maybe because of your file. Sarah met her eyes. With respect, ma'am, I didn't come this far to fail now. For a moment the pilot's expression softened, almost a smile, almost pride. Good, she said quietly. Because there's a rumor Colonel Eileen Collins, Delta Force commander, is observing today's exercise. She's considering a medic for something bigger. Sarah blinked. Delta Force, the top of the top, the kind of unit most medics never even glimpsed. Before she could respond, a deep thud shook the ground. Then another. Smoke erupted in the distance, the start of the simulation. Tangisdal's voice dropped. Remember, Lieutenant, in real combat, there's no reset button. Sarah nodded, gripping her rifle. Yes, ma'am. As she moved toward her starting position, the colonel's earlier words echoed in her mind. Medical skill won't save you. He was wrong about one thing. For her, it always started with saving someone. That was her reason, her anchor, her curse. The first explosions hit closer now, and over the comms came the colonel's voice. Scenario live. Begin phase 2. The battlefield erupted. Within seconds, smoke grenades blanketed the field. Visibility dropped to near zero. The sharp pops of simulated gunfire cracked in every direction. Sarah's training took over. She moved low and fast, scanning for the first casualty marker, a dummy with a prosthetic wound designed for realism. She reached it, dropped to a knee, and began assessing airway, bleeding, cover. Her hands moved automatically, securing a tourniquet, applying pressure, all while her eyes scanned for threats. Gunfire drew closer. She shifted behind a mound of dirt, pulling the dummy into partial cover. Then that voice again, the colonel's, loud, deliberate. Mitchell's exposed on the south flank. Let's see how she handles being the target instead of just patching them up. She froze. That wasn't an accident. He wanted everyone to hear it. Seconds later, the sound of rounds snapping against the ground around her sent her heart racing. She rolled, returned fire with short, controlled bursts, dragging her casualty along one-handed. Her shoulders slammed against the dirt wall. This isn't training, she muttered through clenched teeth. This is a damn witch hunt. Time blurred, 2 hours of chaos. Sweat soaked her uniform. Arms burned from hauling weight and keeping her weapon steady. She'd treated 4 casualties, neutralized 7 opponents, and kept moving. But just when she thought she'd earned a breath, a shadow loomed behind her. Colonel Mitchell. He stepped into her cover zone, face unreadable. Change of scenario, Lieutenant, he said, voice cold. Your commanding officer is wounded in the field. She frowned. Sir, that's not in the... Without warning, he reached down and ripped the medic patch from her shoulder. The sound tore through the noise of battle. Sarah's chest tightened. Let's see who can save you, he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, when you can't even save yourself. Then he stood, deliberately exposing their position, and walked away. Training rounds peppered the ground where he'd stood seconds before. One hit Sarah's shoulder hard, making her flinch. Pain shot down her arm. According to the rules, that meant limited mobility for the rest of the scenario. Fine, so be it. She bit down, adrenaline overriding the ache. Using her legs and core, she dragged the next casualty marker to safety, firing one-handed, adapting as she went. Her breath came ragged but steady. She refused to break. Others began noticing. Faces behind goggles turned her way, silent acknowledgement of the unfairness, and the strength it took to keep going. But then something changed. A new sound cut through the controlled chaos. A different explosion, deeper, less contained. The instructor's head snapped toward the far perimeter. Then came shouts, real ones. And then gunfire, the wrong kind. Real gunfire. Sarah froze. She knew the difference immediately. The sound of live rounds hitting steel, the screams not rehearsed, not acted. Through the smoke she saw figures moving too smoothly, too deliberately, not trainees. Her stomach dropped. This isn't part of the exercise. Colonel, she shouted into her comms, we've got unknowns on the field. Static, then his voice, harsher than ever before but different. Real fear beneath the command tone. All personnel breach of the perimeter. Unknown hostiles on site. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The world seemed to tilt. Sarah's instincts snapped into overdrive. She secured her patient behind cover, switched magazines, and scanned through her scope. 3 insurgents, real ones, were advancing from the east, using the simulated chaos as cover. Her heart slammed in her chest. She exhaled slowly, aligned her sights, and squeezed. The first dropped. Then she saw it, Colonel Mitchell, coordinating defense near the command tower. He was exposed, and behind him, another insurgent moving low, weapon raised. Sarah didn't think. She just moved. Contact rear, she shouted, sprinting across open ground. The insurgent turned his rifle, too late. Sarah hit the colonel with full force, tackling him just as real bullets sliced through the air where he'd been standing. They rolled, dirt filling her mouth. The colonel's eyes were wide, a mix of shock and disbelief. Then his expression changed. Pain. Sarah's gaze followed the dark stain spreading across his vest. A real wound, not simulation. Stay down, sir, she ordered, dropping beside him. Training vanished. Instinct took over. She tore open his vest, locating the wound just below the collarbone. Mitchell, he gasped, voice rasping. You're not authorized to. With respect, sir, she snapped, pressing gauze into the wound. Shut up and let me save your life. Around them, the sound of gunfire intensified. Bass alarms wailed. Smoke turned the air thick and choking. Sarah's hands worked fast, applying pressure, sealing the chest wound, inserting an IV. The colonel's pulse fluttered weakly under her fingers. Why didn't you run? He whispered, voice breaking. After what I did. She met his eyes. Because that's not what medics do. Her words came out steady, but her heart trembled. Gunfire cracked again. She threw herself over him, returning fire with her good arm. 2 insurgents fell. Her magazine clicked empty. For a split second, everything went silent except her heartbeat. Then came the sound, distant at first, then growing. Helicopters. And voices commanding sharp. Delta Force. Dark silhouettes swept through the smoke, weapons flashing in disciplined bursts. Within seconds, the remaining insurgents were down. At their lead, Colonel Eileen Collins. Eyes like calm fire, movements exact, deliberate. She knelt beside Sarah, taking in the scene with one glance. Lieutenant Mitchell, she confirmed. You kept him alive. Sarah nodded, still holding pressure on the wound. Impressive, Collins said quietly. Most would have left him. He's still my commanding officer, Sarah replied. The colonel's bloodied hand twitched, reaching weakly for hers. I was wrong, he whispered. You belong here. As the medevac rotors thundered overhead, Sarah's eyes glistened, not with pride but with exhaustion, relief, and something deeper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The helicopter lifted off, throwing sand into a storm that stung her eyes and clung to her skin. Sarah stood there, one hand still raised against the rotor wash, watching the bird disappear into the pale Afghan sky. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. Around her, the training ground was a ruin of smoke, craters, and blood, half real, half pretend. What had started as an exercise ended as an ambush. The instructors were already moving, shouting, clearing the field, counting heads. 20 candidates had started, 19 were accounted for, 1 still missing. Sarah moved without waiting for orders. Her shoulder ached where the training round had hit, but the dull throb reminded her she was still here, still standing. She scanned the ground, checking every pit and trench until a call crackled through the radio. All clear, area secure, missing trainee located, non-fatal injuries. She exhaled, shoulders sagging for the first time all day. Then the tremor came, the kind that sneaks up when the adrenaline fades. She sat down hard on a metal case, pressing her good hand against her ribs, feeling her heart hammering. Someone touched her shoulder. "You good, Lieutenant?" It was Lieutenant Colonel Tangisdal again, helmet off now, face streaked with dust and sweat. Her voice carried something new, respect. Sarah nodded, though her throat tightened. "I'm fine, ma'am." "You kept your head when everyone else lost theirs," Tangisdal said quietly. "You saved Iron Will Mitchell. I didn't think anyone could pull that off." Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "Guess I didn't get the memo." Tangisdal looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Delta Force owes you one." Collins was impressed. Sarah blinked. The name hit differently now, Colonel Eileen Collins. The woman who had arrived like a storm, led her team through fire, and disappeared again before anyone could even thank her. She didn't seem the type to hand out compliments. "She's not," Tangisdal replied, "which makes it mean more when she does." Sarah looked down at her hands, still trembling faintly, still stained with someone else's blood. "He could have died, ma'am." Tangisdal's eyes softened. "But he didn't because of you." The words settled somewhere deep inside Sarah, not pride exactly, just quiet truth. By nightfall, the base was locked down. The insurgent breach had triggered full security protocols. No one in or out. The investigation began immediately, and so did the whispers. They said the enemy had been watching for weeks, timing the attack to hit when the best medics were exposed. They said someone on the inside had tipped them off. Sarah tried to sleep that night but couldn't. The barracks lights flickered against the ceiling as the generators hummed. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the colonel's voice, taunting, commanding, bleeding, and the ripping sound of that patch being torn away. She reached for her uniform, the torn sleeve folded neatly on her bunk. The absence of that patch burned more than the bruise on her shoulder. It wasn't about the fabric, it was about what it meant. Identity, purpose, proof. Somewhere outside, a door slammed, followed by muffled laughter. A couple of trainees walking past, joking in the dark. She envied them, their ease, their unbroken faith that the next day would be simple again. But for her, nothing was simple now. "Why didn't you run?" His voice echoed again. She closed her eyes, whispering to the empty room, "Because someone has to stay." The next morning came gray and cold. The desert light was harsh even without the sun showing. When she stepped outside, the wind cut through her fatigues like knives. Every face she passed turned toward her, some with admiration, some with silent judgment. News had spread fast. The medic who saved Iron Will. The lieutenant who broke protocol and didn't die for it. At the mess hall, she sat alone. The coffee was burned, the eggs rubbery, but she ate anyway. The body needed fuel, even when the heart was tired. "Seat taken." She looked up. Captain Diaz, one of the instructors, stood with a tray balanced in one hand. He was older, calm, one of those soldiers who seemed carved from quiet discipline. "No, sir." He sat across from her, lowering his voice. "Command, talking about what happened. Mitchell's alive, stable. You did good work out there." Sarah nodded, unsure what to say. Compliments felt strange after so much hostility. Diaz sipped his coffee. "Word is, Colonel Collins requested a copy of your after-action report." Her fork stopped midway to her mouth. "She did." He smiled faintly. "She doesn't ask for reports unless she's considering someone for her team." Sarah frowned. "Delta Force doesn't recruit medics." "They do now." Before she could ask more, a voice boomed from the doorway. "Lieutenant Mitchell, Colonel wants to see you, now." Every head turned. The mess hall went silent. Sarah stood, tray forgotten. The walk to headquarters felt longer than any ruck march she'd ever done. Inside, the air was cold and still. A guard opened the office door without a word. Colonel Mitchell was there, alive, upright, pale but standing. His left arm was in a sling, his chest bound under the uniform. He looked smaller somehow, mortal. She snapped to attention. "Sir." "At ease," he said quietly. For once his voice wasn't iron, it was human. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You disobeyed orders yesterday. You broke formation. You exposed yourself to enemy fire. You ignored the scenario boundaries." "Yes, sir." "And because of that," he continued, stepping closer, 5 people are alive, including me." Sarah blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "I read the incident report," he said. "I also rewrote part of it." He reached for a small box on his desk, opened it, and took out something she hadn't expected to see again. Her patch. But not the same one. This one was darker, edged in silver, the special operations variant. The kind given only to those proven in real combat under impossible conditions. He extended it toward her. "This belongs to you." Her throat closed. She managed to take it, fingers trembling slightly. "Permission to speak freely, sir." He nodded once. "Why?" she asked softly. "After everything, why give this back?" Mitchell's expression shifted. "Because I was wrong about a lot of things." He took a breath that sounded painful. "You reminded me why medics wear that patch in the first place. Not to be protected, but to protect, even from people like me." Silence filled the room. Outside, a helicopter passed low, the sound fading like a heartbeat. Finally, she said quietly, "Thank you, sir." He gave a small nod. "Colonel Collins of Delta Force put in a request for your transfer. I've approved it. You'll report to her command within 48 hours. Sarah's breath caught. Delta Force. She said she needs someone who doesn't run when things go bad. Someone who remembers what saving lives looks like when everyone else forgets. He paused, then added almost to himself, "I think she found her candidate." She stood there, unable to hide the emotion that flickered across her face, shock, gratitude, fear. "I won't let her down." "I know you won't." His eyes softened, something fatherly creeping into the lines of his face. "Dismissed, Lieutenant, and Mitchell." "Sorry." He almost smiled. "Next time someone tears that patch off, make them earn it." Outside, the sun was bright again. The air smelled like dust and jet fuel and second chances. She pressed the patch against her sleeve, fingers tracing its edge. Later that evening, she walked the perimeter fence alone. The sky burned orange, the mountains glowing like embers. Somewhere behind her, soldiers laughed, vehicles rumbled, life resumed. But her mind was already elsewhere, toward the unknown waiting for her. Delta Force. The words didn't feel real yet. She thought of Colonel Collins, steady, calm, commanding in the chaos. The way her team had moved as one, each motion deliberate, unflinching. That kind of unity didn't come from training alone. It came from belief, from trust. Could she belong in that world? Could a medic, once doubted, once humiliated, stand among them as equal? The wind answered with silence. When she finally turned back toward the barracks, she saw Tangisdal leaning against a jeep, arms crossed. "Guess you heard," Sarah said. The pilot smiled. "Everyone's heard, you're Delta now." Sarah chuckled softly. "Feels strange." "It should," Tangisdal said. "It means it matters." They stood there a moment, watching the horizon fade into night. "You'll do fine," Tangisdal added. "Collins doesn't recruit soldiers, she recruits believers. And you, Mitchell, you believe in something most people forgot." Sarah tilted her head. "What's that?" Tangisdal smiled faintly. "Mercy." The word hung between them, simple, heavy, true. When Sarah returned to her bunk, she packed in silence. Boots, fatigues, field kit. She stopped only once, pulling out the old torn sleeve. For a second, she considered throwing it away. Then she folded it neatly and tucked it into her rucksack, a reminder of what it cost to earn a place where she belonged. That night, as the base settled into uneasy quiet, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. The ceiling fan turned slowly, slicing the air in rhythmic beats. Tomorrow she would leave Condor, leave behind the woman who arrived uncertain, and become the one who stayed when everyone else ran. Sleep came slowly, filled with half-dreams of helicopters, sirens, and the colonel's fatting voice. And when dawn broke, pale, relentless, Sarah Mitchell was already awake, uniform pressed, boots polished, medic patch sewn back where it belonged. She looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection stared back with calm eyes that had seen too much and still refused to look away. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, not her own this time, quiet and sure. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wheels touched down with a jolt that shook the inside of the transport. Sarah's stomach lifted, then settled. Afghanistan was behind her now, at least the part with the sand and the ghosts. Ahead lay something else entirely, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and somewhere inside it, the headquarters of Delta Force. The ramp lowered with a hiss. Cool, wet air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and jet fuel. She'd almost forgotten what green looked like. 2 MPs waited at the edge of the tarmac. No salutes, no names, just a curt nod and a clipboard. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you're expected. Follow us." She slung her duffel over her shoulder and obeyed. The path wound through chain-link fences and silent hangars until it ended at a plain concrete building that looked more like a warehouse than a command center. A small sign read "Authorized Personnel Only." Inside, everything was quiet efficiency. No shouting, no idle chatter, just the rhythmic tap of boots and the low hum of machinery. She caught glimpses of men and women moving through corridors, faces unreadable, uniforms stripped of identifying marks. At the front desk, a woman in civilian clothes looked up from her monitor. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, you're early." Sarah hesitated. "Should I come back?" The woman smiled faintly. "No one here complains about early." She pressed a button. "Colonel Collins, your transfer is here." A voice answered through the intercom. "Send her in." The door to the inner office opened with a soft click. Colonel Eileen Collins looked exactly as Sarah remembered. Tall, composed, the kind of presence that filled a room without raising her voice. She wore no decorations, no shine, just practicality. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Collins said, "welcome to the unit." Sarah snapped to attention. "Ma'am." "At ease." Collins gestured toward a chair but didn't sit herself. "I read your file, twice. Then I read your after-action report from Condor." Sarah waited, unsure whether to speak. "Iron Will doesn't hand out praise easily," Collins continued. "The man once refused to decorate a captain who pulled 6 soldiers from a burning vehicle because he didn't follow procedure. Yet he recommended you for transfer." Sarah exhaled softly. "I didn't expect that, ma'am." "No one does," Collins said. "That's why it matters." She finally sat, folding her hands. "Tell me, Lieutenant, why didn't you run that day?" Sarah looked at her, the question stirring memories she'd tried to bury. "Because he was bleeding," she said simply, "and because I was the only one who could stop it." Collins studied her for a long moment, then she nodded once. "Good answer, honest. Most people would have said duty or honor. You said truth." Silence hung for a beat. "You'll find we operate differently here," Collins said. "We're not interested in perfect soldiers. We're interested in people who do the right thing when the rules fall apart." She stood, motioning for Sarah to follow. "Come, meet your team." They walked down a corridor that smelled faintly of oil and ozone. Behind reinforced glass, mechanics worked on aircraft, helicopters stripped to their bones, drones the size of cars, black paint swallowing the light. "This is Task Echo," Collins said. A specialized medical response detachment. We go where we're not supposed to be, do what no one admits we did, and make sure people come home breathing. Sarah's pulse quickened. They entered a briefing room where 6 operators waited. They rose as Collins entered. Team, this is Lieutenant Mitchell, combat medic 2 tour Afghanistan, survivor of Condor incident. The room stayed silent. Then a man with a shaved head and scarred knuckles nodded once. I'm Staff Sergeant Rains, team lead. His voice was gravel. Heard about you. You kept Iron Will alive, respect. Another operator, a woman with cropped hair and calm eyes, offered her hand. Sergeant Holt, I run comms and logistics. If you need gear, ask me first. Ask anyone else and it'll disappear. One by one, the rest introduced themselves. No small talk, no smiles, but something in their eyes told her they'd already read her file, maybe even watched the footage. She was being measured again, but this time not dismissed. Collins broke the silence. You'll start orientation tomorrow. Medical Bay on sub-level 2. Quartermaster will issue new gear. Holt will show you your quarters. Yes, ma'am. As the colonel turned to leave, Sarah asked quietly, why me? There must be dozens more qualified. Collins stopped at the door. There are, but they're not you, her tone softened. You didn't freeze, didn't panic, didn't wait for permission to save a life. That's rare. We need rare. When Collins left, the team returned to their tasks. Holt gestured for Sarah to follow. The living quarters were spare, 6 metal bunks, a row of lockers, walls painted the color of rain. Holt pointed to an empty bunk. That one's yours. We rotate deployment every 6 weeks, so don't unpack too much. Sarah set her duffel down. The hum of ventilation filled the quiet. What's the mission profile? Holt leaned against the wall. Rapid infiltration. Humanitarian extractions, hostage recovery, downed pilot rescues, anything that requires medics under fire. Sounds straightforward. Holt smiled thinly. Nothing here is straightforward, you'll learn. That night Sarah sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at the duffel she hadn't unpacked. The patch glinted faintly in the low light. She traced its edge again. For the first time in months, she felt something close to belonging. Still, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound, a door closing, boots in the hall, snapped her awake. The habits of war never really leave. She finally drifted off near dawn, dreaming of sandstorms turning into ocean waves, and a voice, Colonel Mitchell's, saying, make them earn it. When the wake-up alarm sounded at 500, Holt was already up, tightening her boots. PT in 5, she said. Don't be late. Collins hates late. The morning air bit cold as they ran the perimeter trail, 6 miles through mud and fog. Rain set the pace steady, punishing. No one spoke. Breath came in clouds. Sarah kept up, ignoring the throb in her shoulder. Halfway through, Rains glanced sideways. You were medic, right? Not operator. Still am, she said. He nodded once. Good. Don't try to be something you're not. Just be the best medic we've got. By the time they returned, her legs felt like lead, but she refused to drop behind. The others noticed. Rains's small grunt of approval, Holt's quick nod. Little things that meant everything here. Training filled the rest of the day: marksmanship, field triage under stress, evac coordination with limited resources. It was relentless. Collins observed from the catwalk above, arms crossed, face unreadable. During a break, Sarah found herself beside Rains at the range. He loaded his rifle without looking. You'll get used to her watching, he said. She's not judging you. She's remembering if she can trust you when it counts. When will that be? He gave a half smile. Sooner than you think. 3 nights later, the alert came. Sarah had just finished inventory in the medical bay when the siren pulsed once, short, low, specific. Not a drill. Rains appeared in the doorway, helmet under his arm. Grab your kit. We're wheels up in 15. What's the op? Extraction. civilian engineer trapped behind insurgent lines, northern Iraq. We're backup for a recon unit that went dark. Her pulse jumped, first deployment already. They moved fast, no briefings, no speeches. The hangar opened, revealing a black helicopter waiting under floodlights. As Sarah climbed aboard, Collins met her eyes across the rotors. No words, just a nod. The flight was long, loud, and silent. Each operator checked gear, faces lit by red interior lights. Sarah did the same, forcing her hands to stay steady. Rains leaned close. Rule 1, no hero moves. You're there to keep us alive, not prove you can shoot. Understood. The helicopter dropped to terrain-hugging altitude, the windows filling with streaks of mountain shadow. Over the comms came the pilot's voice. 2 minutes out. Sarah felt her heartbeat sync with the rotor rhythm. Fast, hard, inevitable. They landed in darkness. Wind whipped dust around them as they disembarked, weapons raised. "Echo team move," Rains ordered. They advanced through narrow alleys of a half-abandoned village. The night smelled of smoke and damp stone. Somewhere ahead, faint gunfire echoed, sporadic, close. Sarah followed Holt's silhouette, every step careful. She'd been under fire before, but this was different. No defined lines, no visible enemy, just the weight of being unseen. "Contact left," someone whispered. Figures flickered in the darkness. Rains gestured, 2 operators peeled off, silent as shadows. Then a sudden burst of gunfire shattered the night. Sarah dropped behind a wall, clutching her rifle. "Medic," the call was sharp, urgent. She sprinted toward it, low and fast. Holt was down, clutching her thigh. Blood poured through her fingers. "I'm here," Sarah said, dropping beside her. She tore open the med kit, hands moving automatically, tourniquet, compression gauze, injection. "Stay with me," she said, voice calm though her pulse roared. "I've got you." Rounds cracked overhead. Stone splintered inches from her head. She ignored it, focusing only on pressure, seal, breathing. "Target down," Rains shouted somewhere beyond. "Perimeter secure." Sarah finished the rap, checking Holt's pulse. Strong, stable. Holt grimaced. "You really don't flinch, do you?" "Not my thing," Sarah said softly. They extracted within minutes. By the time they reached the helicopter, Holt was conscious and cursing again. The team climbed aboard, sweat and smoke clinging to their gear. As the helicopter lifted, Collins's voice came through the headset. "Casualty status." Sarah keyed the mic. "Non-fatal, stable, mission success." "Copy," Collins said. "Good work, Lieutenant." The words hit her harder than she expected. She stared out the window, watching the lights of the valley fade beneath them. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was proving anything. She just was. The hum of the engines filled the silence, and Sarah leaned back against the seat, letting exhaustion wash over her. Somewhere below, the night swallowed the battlefield again. Somewhere ahead, another would come. And in between, just brief moments like this one, quiet, fleeting, human. She looked at her gloved hands, streaked with someone else's blood, and thought, not of glory, not of medals, but of mercy once more. Because in the end, that was her war. Not against enemies, but against the moments when people forgot what being alive was worth. The debrief room was dark except for the projector's pale glow. Lines of data flickered across the screen, casualty counts, extraction time, operational footage captured by helmet cams. Sarah sat straight-backed at the table, uniform still creased from the flight. Around her, the team sat in silence as Colonel Collins stood at the front, arms crossed. "Mission success," Collins said finally. "Engineer recovered, minimal collateral, 1 minor injury." Her eyes flicked to Holt, whose thigh was bandaged but whose smirk hadn't faded. Rains spoke first. "Enemy contact was organized, too clean for local militia." "Agreed," Collins said. "Intel is checking. In the meantime, we rest, rearm, and prepare for follow-on operations." Her gaze shifted to Sarah. "Lieutenant, walk with me." The rest of the team exchanged glances. No one ever got walks with the colonel unless it mattered. Outside, the night air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Collins led her down a quiet corridor that opened to the training yard, empty now, lights casting long shadows on the wet asphalt. "You handled yourself well," Collins said. "No hesitation under fire, no mistakes under pressure." "Thank you, ma'am." "But that's not what I'm asking about." Collins stopped, facing her. "When Holt went down, you exposed yourself for almost 15 seconds in open terrain. Why?" Sarah met her eyes. "Because she was bleeding out." "You could have been hit." "I was." Collins studied her for a moment. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. "Too much heart, not enough self-preservation." Sarah hesitated. "Is that a bad thing?" "In this line of work," Collins said, "it's both your greatest strength and your greatest risk." She started walking again. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. We deploy again in 36 hours. The next mission came fast. Briefing room, low lights, satellite images projected across the table, Collins's voice steady and clipped. "Target area, the Al-Qasir province, Syrian border. Intel confirms an underground compound housing high-value hostages, aid workers, locals, possibly an American journalist. Our job, extraction. Fast, silent, no collateral. We leave tonight." Rains nodded. "Insertion method. Black Hawk, low altitude. We enter through secondary ventilation shafts. Expect narrow corridors, poor visibility, possible chemical storage." Sarah's stomach tightened. Confined spaces and volatile chemicals, bad mix for both patients and medics. Collins's gaze swept the room. "We bring everyone we can, but understand this mission carries rules of containment. If compromise is imminent, we don't risk the team for unconfirmed hostiles." "Understood." Everyone answered in unison, "Yes, ma'am." Sarah echoed the words, but something inside her hesitated. She'd seen that phrase before, "Don't risk the team for unconfirmed hostiles." In practice, it meant, choose who lives. Hours later, they were airborne again. The desert below was a vast, moonlit ocean of sand and shadow. Sarah sat across from Holt, who gave a tight smile. "Ready for round 2. "Always." Rains passed by, checking equipment. "Remember, this is Condor. You're one of us now. That means we trust you to think, but also to obey." "I understand." "Good." The helicopter dipped low, the sound of the rotors drowned by wind. When the green light blinked, they moved, fast ropes, boots hitting dirt, silence swallowing everything. The compound rose ahead, a patchwork of crumbling stone and steel, half buried in the earth. Rains signaled. 2 operators secured the perimeter while the rest advanced toward a narrow shaft leading underground. Inside, it was colder than the night above. The smell of oil, rust, and something sour filled the tunnels. Their flashlights cut through the dark, beams trembling over pipes and concrete. "Movement 20 meters ahead," Holt whispered. Rains raised a fist. They froze. A figure appeared, a guard, unaware of them until it was too late. One suppressed shot. Silence returned. They advanced. Deeper now, corridors split and twisted. Sarah's breathing grew shallow under her mask. Every footstep echoed like thunder. Then faint voices, desperate pleading. They found the first group in a locked room, 5 civilians, malnourished, terrified. Sarah rushed in, checking vitals, scanning for injuries. "Hostages secured," she reported. "Some dehydration, 1 fractured leg." Rains nodded. "Package these 5 for evac." But before they could move, a noise rattled from the next corridor, metal scraping, muffled shouting. Sarah turned toward it instinctively. "There's more." "Negative," Rains said. "We move with confirmed." She hesitated. "Those are human voices." "Could be bait," he countered. "Orders are clear, no secondary risk." Collins's voice came through the comms. "Echo status." "Primary secured," Rains said. Sarah cut in. Audible movement in adjoining corridor, ma'am. Possible additional captives. A pause. How certain? Not certain, ma'am, but it sounds. Lieutenant, Collins interrupted, tone measured. We have 7 minutes before extraction window closes. I can't authorize pursuit without verification. Sarah looked down the dark passage. The sound faint but distinct. Cries, metal, maybe a child. Understood, ma'am, she said. Raines gestured for the team to move. Let's go. But as they loaded the civilians for extraction, Sarah's mind wouldn't quiet. The voices haunted the edges of her hearing, the kind that stay even after silence returns. When the last hostage was secured, she lingered. Give me 30 seconds, she said. Raines turned sharply. Mitchell, no. She moved anyway. One corridor, one turn, then another. The cries grew louder. She found a small locked cell, 2 people inside, a man and a girl, maybe 10. Her pulse spiked. Hold on, she whispered, crouching to pick the lock. The hinges groaned. I've got you. The girl's eyes widened in fear and hope all at once. Lieutenant, Raines's voice cracked through the comms. Extraction now, we're pulling out. Sarah glanced at the pair. Leaving them wasn't an option. She pulled the man up, motioning for him to carry the child. Come on, move. She ran. The tunnel behind her thundered with distant explosions, the team setting charges to cover their exit. When she emerged into the cool night, the helicopter's blades were already spinning. Raines was at the ramp, fury written across his face. You disobeyed a direct order. She shoved the civilians toward him. You said we don't leave hostiles. They're not hostiles, they're human. He grabbed her vest. You risked the team. Before she could respond, Collins's voice cut in over the comms. Get aboard now. They lifted off seconds later, desert receding beneath them. Sarah sat on the floor beside the rescued pair. The little girl clung to her arm, eyes wide with exhaustion and relief. Collins approached from the cockpit, crouching beside them. You found them in the adjoining corridor. Yes, ma'am. Without authorization. Yes, ma'am. Collins looked at the girl, her small fingers gripping Sarah's sleeve, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she stood. We'll discuss it after debrief. Raines's jaw tightened. No one spoke the rest of the flight. The next morning, the base was silent again. The rescued civilians had been handed to medevac. The girl had smiled before leaving, whispering something in Arabic Sarah couldn't understand but somehow felt, thank you. When Collins called her to the office, Sarah expected the worst. The colonel stood by the window, looking out at the mist-covered training field. You disobeyed direct command, she said without turning. Yes, ma'am. You endangered yourself and your team. Yes, ma'am. Explain. Sarah's throat felt dry. Because I heard them. Because leaving them behind would have been a choice I couldn't live with. Collins turned, her face unreadable. And if it had been a trap, if Raines or Holt had died because of your choice? I'd have carried that too, Sarah said softly, but at least I'd still recognize myself. For a long time, Collins said nothing. Then she moved closer, voice quiet. Do you know why I recruited you? Sarah shook her head. Because Iron Will called you stubborn, Collins said. He said you break rules when you believed something mattered. I need that. But I also need you to know when to stop. She walked to her desk, placing a folder down. Inside was a photo, grainy, aerial, time-stamped. Those 2 civilians you pulled out, Collins said. The girl's father was a journalist working undercover. He'd been transmitting coordinates of captured hostages before comms went dark. Your disobedience just gave us intel that may save 20 more lives. Sarah's chest tightened. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, but you acted anyway. Collins closed the file. Next time tell me first. I'll back your call, but I need to know it's coming. Sarah nodded. Yes, ma'am. Collins studied her for a moment longer, then said, You'll fit here, Lieutenant. Just don't lose what makes you different." Sarah stood there, the words echoing inside her long after she left the room. In the hallway, she passed Rains. He didn't speak, just looked at her for a second, then offered a small nod, the kind that said you were right, even if he'd never admitted aloud. That night, Sarah sat outside under the stars, the air cool against her skin. She thought about the girl, the way she'd clung to her sleeve, the weight of small hands trusting her completely. Somewhere far away, others were still waiting, still unseen, unheard. And Sarah knew one thing for certain. She might wear a soldier's uniform. She might carry a weapon. But her war would always be for the living. Because in a world that rewarded obedience, mercy was her quiet rebellion. The sky above northern Syria burned orange with dawn when the Black Hawk lifted off again. Sarah watched the horizon tilt and vanish beneath the dust trail. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something she couldn't quite name, a kind of fatigue that didn't come from lack of sleep. They were flying home, another mission complete. Another handful of lives pulled back from the edge. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were just circling the same darkness, winning battles no one would ever hear about, saving people who'd disappear into the next crisis. She closed her eyes, resting her head against the cool metal wall. Holt sat beside her, thighs still bandaged, helmet tilted back. "You're thinking too loud again," Holt said. Sarah cracked a smile. "You can hear that. Loud and clear. Happens to all of us. After a while, you start questioning what difference it makes. Does it ever stop?" Holt's gaze drifted out the window. "You don't want it to. The day you stop caring, you're done out here." Sarah nodded, the words sinking deep. Back at base, the debrief was short. Collins gave no speeches, no praise, just a single line before dismissing them. "You did what needed to be done." That was her way of saying good work. But Sarah saw something else in the colonel's eyes that day, something quieter, almost protective. As if Collins knew what was coming next. 2 weeks later, Delta was redeployed. Operation Iron Veil. Objective: retrieve classified intel from a compromised safehouse near the Turkish border. Secondary: recover 2 missing operatives. The briefing was crisp. Rains led it. Collins observed in silence. "Intel suggests the compound is under insurgent control," Rains said, tracing lines on the satellite image. "We insert pre-dawn, breach through north wall, extract data drives and recover friendlies if alive. Limited engagement. In and out in under 12 minutes. "Who's on overwatch?" Sarah asked. Rains nodded to the corner. "That'd be Petty Officer Lane." Sarah turned. Lane was new, a quiet sniper with sharp eyes and an even sharper focus. He gave her a short nod. She returned it. The team loaded up an hour before dawn. The air inside the helicopter was thick with silence, the kind that lives before something dangerous. Holt checked her radio. 12 minutes. We should be able to manage that, right? Rain smirked. "We always do." No one said it aloud, but they all knew. Nothing ever went exactly as planned. They hit the ground just before sunrise. The compound sat in a hollow valley, half buried under crumbling walls and rusted towers. The world was gray and still. Rains raised a fist. The team fanned out, silent and precise. Holt secured comms. Lane's voice came over the radio, calm, steady. "Overwatch in position. 2 tangos on outer wall. No patrols moving. You're clear." They advanced fast. Breach charges set. A muffled thump and they were inside. Dust and darkness swallowed them. Sarah's pulse slowed to mission rhythm, heartbeat syncing with her footsteps. They cleared room after room. Empty bunks, maps, scattered ammo crates, then movement. Rains's hand shot up. "Contact right." A burst of gunfire tore through the corridor. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The team returned fire, controlled, efficient. When it ended, silence returned. broken only by Sarah's breathing and the metallic drip of something unseen. They pressed deeper. The safehouse core was a small room lined with computers and shattered monitors. Holt moved in, securing the data drives while Rains covered the door. Sarah scanned the bodies. None of them were the missing operatives. Lane's voice crackled over comms again. Multiple hostiles moving from the South Ridge. You've got company. Copy, Rains said. We're pulling out. Negative, Collins's voice came through command. You have 5 minutes. Prioritize the drives. Understood, Rains replied, though his tone said otherwise. Sarah helped Holt disconnect the final cable. Got it. Move, Rains ordered. They began the exfil, darting through the narrow hallways, when the first explosion hit. The floor shook, concrete cracked, dust filled the air. Ambush, Holt shouted. Lane's voice came through the comms, sharp and fast. They've got RPGs on the ridge, multiple. Can you take them? Rains yelled. 1 shot, maybe 2. Another explosion ripped through the north wall. Fire rolled down the corridor. Sarah was thrown off her feet. When she opened her eyes, the world was sideways. Her ears rang. Smoke stung her lungs. Holt, she coughed. Here, Holt's voice answered, strained but alive. Rains. No answer. Sarah crawled forward through the haze, dragging her med pack. She found him halfway down the corridor, pinned under debris, leg twisted unnaturally. Got you, she whispered, adrenaline cutting through the pain. She wedged her shoulder under the slab, pushing until her muscles screamed. It moved, just enough. Rains gasped, dragging himself free. They knew we were coming, he said. Don't talk, she ordered, already cutting fabric, assessing the damage. Compound fracture. You're not walking on this. Leave me, he hissed. Get Holt and the drives out. Not happening. She splinted the leg, ignoring his protests, then keyed her comm. Command, this is Echo Medic. Rains is down, leg compromised. We need evac coordinates now. Static. Lane, come in. No response. Damn it, she muttered, slinging Rains's arm over her shoulder. He was heavier than she remembered, every step burning through her muscles. They limped toward the exit, the world shaking around them. Holt appeared at the doorway, rifle raised. Hostiles closing in. Cover us, Sarah shouted. Holt fired in controlled bursts, brass casings clattering across the floor. Then a sudden crack, sharper than the rest. Holt jerked. Her body hit the wall. No, Sarah dropped Rains, sprinting toward her. Holt's eyes fluttered, her hand pressed to her chest where blood pulsed through her fingers. Stay with me, Sarah said, ripping open her kit. Come on, Holt, breathe. Rains crawled forward, face pale. We have to move. Not without her. Sarah worked fast, gauze, pressure, seal, but the blood kept coming. Too much, too fast. Holt's breath turned shallow. Her hand trembled, reaching for Sarah's sleeve. Don't, Sarah whispered. You're fine, you're fine. Holt's lips moved. Go. No. Go. Her eyes went still. For a moment, there was no word, no sound, just silence. Then another explosion threw them, both to the ground. Sarah's ears rang, tears blurred her vision. She dragged Rains again, half blind, half broken. Outside, gunfire roared like thunder. The helicopter appeared through the smoke, Collins herself at the door, shouting orders. Move, move. Sarah pushed through the last stretch, shoving Rains aboard before collapsing to her knees. Where Holt? Collins demanded. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at her blood-soaked hands. The colonel's jaw tightened. We're leaving. The helicopter lifted, the compound shrinking below them until it was just dust and flame. Sarah sat in silence, arms wrapped around herself, watching the fire burn. Back at base, the debrief room was quiet. Rains was in the infirmary, legs stabilized. The drives were secure. The mission was labeled successful. But the word felt hollow. Collins dismissed everyone except Sarah. "Stay," she said softly. When the door closed, the colonel didn't speak right away. She walked to the table, set down a small dog tag, Holtz. Sarah stared at it, throat closing. "I'm sorry," Collins said. "She was one of the best." Sarah's hands curled into fists. "I should have saved her." "You did everything right." "Then why isn't she here?" Collins's eyes softened with something that looked almost like grief. "Because this job doesn't care what's right. It only cares what's possible." Sarah looked away, tears streaking her cheeks silently. "You're not the first to lose someone," Collins said, "but you can't let it hollow you out. Grief can sharpen you or it can break you. You choose which." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in the dim light of her quarters, Holt's dog tag lying in her palm. Every sound of the base echoed differently now: boots, engines, laughter from another room. It all felt distant, unreal. She thought about Holt's words, "You don't want it to stop." Maybe this was what she meant. That caring was a wound you learned to live with. Sarah took a deep breath and fastened the tag around her neck. The cold metal rested against her skin like a weight she didn't want to forget. When she looked in the mirror, the reflection that stared back wasn't the same woman who'd arrived at Condor months ago. This one had seen what mercy cost. And still, somewhere beneath the exhaustion, the grief, and the guilt, she knew she would go again if they called. Because that's what mercy did. It hurt and it stayed, and it made you go back anyway. She whispered into the quiet, voice trembling but steady. "For you, Holt." Outside, dawn crept over the horizon again, pale and relentless. The wind howled across the tarmac that morning, cold and sharp as steel. Sarah stood by the hangar doors, watching the sunrise blur behind the fog. The light hit her eyes but didn't warm her. 3 weeks had passed since Holt's death, but time hadn't softened anything. It just dulled the edges, like pain sinking under scar tissue. Every night she still heard it, Holt's voice, fatting between the gunfire. "Go." And every morning, she woke up with that same word burning in her chest. She trained harder, slept less, pushed herself until her hands shook and her lungs burned. The others noticed, of course. They just didn't say anything. Delta didn't talk about grief. They outtrained it. Rains was still recovering, walking with a brace but back in the briefing room. Lane had taken over team lead temporarily, quiet, steady, with eyes that saw more than he said. The first day Sarah showed up early for range drills, he just nodded. "You're either trying to forget something or remember it," he said. "Maybe both." He didn't ask more. He just handed her another magazine. The missions that followed blurred together, short deployments, quick extractions, low collateral. On paper, all successful. But something inside her had changed. She moved like a ghost, precise, silent, detached. The medic who once knelt beside the wounded with calm conviction now just went through the motions. She saved lives, yes, but her eyes didn't soften anymore. Her hands worked by memory, not heart. Even Collins noticed. One afternoon, Sarah was cataloging medical supplies in the armory when the colonel appeared in the doorway. "Lieutenant." Sarah turned sharply. "Ma'am." Collins studied her a moment, expression unreadable. "You've been volunteering for every mission." "Yes, ma'am." "Even the ones outside your rotation?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Sarah hesitated. "Because I'm available." "That's not an answer." Sarah met her eyes. "Because if I stop moving, I'll think, and if I think, I'll remember." The colonel's tone softened. "Grief's not a weakness, Mitchell. It's a cost. Every one of us pays it sooner or later." "I can't afford it," Sarah said quietly. Collins sighed. "You think Holt would want you like this?" Sarah looked away, throat tight. "She's gone because of me." "No," Collins said firmly. "She's gone because of war. You just happen to be the one still standing." The words hung heavy in the air. Then Collins added quietly, "You can carry her memory without letting it bury you." Sarah didn't answer. She just went back to sorting bandages until the colonel left. That night Sarah sat outside the barracks, the desert wind whipping against her face. She rolled Holt's dog tag between her fingers, its edges worn smooth. Every soldier had ghosts. She met theirs in the silences between missions, names they never said, faces they never forgot. But her ghost didn't speak. It just looked back with quiet disappointment, asking one unspoken question: why did you stop caring? She didn't have an answer. 2 days later, a new mission brief came down. A joint operation with NATO, codenamed Silver Line. Rains led the team again, still limping slightly but steady as ever. Collins oversaw the operation personally. Target: a downed NATO aircraft in the outskirts of northern Lebanon. Intel suggested survivors, possibly civilians. Sarah's pulse quickened when she heard civilians. It had been months since she'd treated one. Recovery priority, Collins said, but the crash zone's hot. Insurgent groups are converging. We're in and out, minimal engagement. Sarah nodded, tightening the straps on her med kit. As they loaded the helicopter, Lane approached her quietly. "You ready?" She hesitated. "I'm always ready." He studied her face. "That's not what I asked." She looked away. "Doesn't matter." He gave a small nod. "Just remember what you're here for." The helicopter roared to life, cutting the conversation short. They touched down in mountainous terrain, steep ridges, narrow valleys, trees twisted by wind. Smoke rose in the distance where the aircraft had gone down. "Rains, take point," Collins ordered through comms. "Mitchell, your rear guard, Lane, overwatch." The team moved fast but careful, following the trail of scattered debris. Metal fragments gleamed like bones in the mud. Half a mile in, they found the wreck. A torn fuselage split in two, smoke still curling from the engine. Rains raised a fist. "Contact, 2 hostiles on the ridge." Lane's voice came over comms, calm as ever. "I've got them." 2 suppressed shots, silence. "Area secure," he said. Sarah climbed over the debris, scanning for signs of life. Then she saw movement, a man pinned under twisted metal, his uniform scorched, leg mangled. "Alive," she shouted. She dropped beside him, assessing quickly. "You're going to be okay." His eyes opened, glassy and terrified. "There's a woman in the cockpit." Sarah turned. The front half of the fuselage was crumpled like a tin can. Smoke hissed from ruptured lines. "Rains, I'm going in." "Negative. We've got incoming movement on thermals." "She's alive." "Mitchell." But she was already moving. The cockpit door was jammed. She drew her knife, prying it open inch by inch until the metal gave way. Inside, she found her, the pilot, barely conscious, trapped under the console. Blood matted her hair, and fire crept closer along the floor. Sarah lunged forward, pulling debris aside. "You're all right, I've got you." The pilot's lips trembled. "Leave me, it's going to blow." Sarah ignored her. "Not today." She got her arm under the pilot's shoulders, dragging her free just as the first small explosion erupted behind them. The blast threw them both to the ground. "Mitchell, report." Collins's voice cut through static. "2 survivors, both critical, evac now." "Helicopters 3 minutes out. Hold position." 3 minutes. An eternity under fire. Rains and Lane took up defensive positions as insurgents began closing in, shadowy figures moving through the smoke. Gunfire echoed off the cliffs. Sarah crouched low, shielding her patients. Her hands worked automatically, field dressing, chest seal, airway stabilization. She could barely hear herself think over the gunfire. Lane's calm voice came through the headset. 2 down, 3 more moving right flank. Rains barked, "Hold the line." A round snapped past Sarah's ear, embedding into the dirt inches away. She didn't flinch. Another explosion lit the sky, this time closer. The heat hit her face, the sound swallowing everything. And then silence again. When she opened her eyes, the world had shifted. Lane was down, clutching his shoulder. Rains was firing one-handed. The evac chopper appeared over the ridge, rotors slicing through the smoke. Go, go. Sarah hauled the pilot up, dragging her toward the landing zone, adrenaline overriding pain. Rains staggered behind, supporting the male survivor. They made it to the bird just as gunfire erupted again. Rounds tore through the dirt, one hitting the helicopter's side armor with a metallic scream. "Everyone aboard," Collins shouted from the ramp. Sarah pushed the wounded in first, then turned back for Rains. He stumbled, the male survivor slung over his shoulder. A round hit the ground near them, showering dirt. She sprinted forward, grabbed Rains's arm and pulled both aboard. The helicopter lifted hard, bullets pinging off the hull. Inside, chaos turned to stillness. Sarah's hands were covered in blood, hers, theirs, everyone's. She leaned back, heart pounding, ears ringing. Rains sat across from her, breathing hard, eyes closed. Lane clutched his shoulder but gave a thumbs up. The pilot, the woman she'd pulled from the cockpit, stirred faintly. Sarah leaned over, checking her vitals. "Stay with me." The woman's lips parted. "You came back." Sarah blinked, throat tightening. "Of course I did." The helicopter broke through the smoke and into clean air. The rising sun spilled through the windows, painting everything in gold. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something shift, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. She wasn't hollow anymore. She was hurting, yes, but she was alive. When they landed, Collins met them on the tarmac, eyes scanning each face. "Good work," she said simply. Rains nodded, exhausted. "We almost didn't make it." "You did," Collins replied. Then she turned to Sarah. "You disobeyed my stand-down order." Sarah swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "You also saved 2 lives that would have been lost in 30 seconds. Collins's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're a problem, Mitchell." Sarah managed a tired grin. "So I've been told." Collins's tone softened. "Don't lose that, not ever." Sarah nodded, too tired to speak, too full to breathe. Later, when the others had gone, she sat alone beside the landing pad. The wind was cool, carrying the faint echo of rotor blades long gone. She looked at Holt's tag hanging around her neck and whispered, "I'm still here." For a long time, she stayed like that, letting the silence settle. She realized then that Holt's death hadn't broken her. It had reminded her of what mercy costs and why it matters. The war didn't need more soldiers who followed orders. It needed the few who still remembered how to care. And in that small, quiet moment, as the first light of dawn crept over the field, Sarah Mitchell rediscovered something she'd almost lost herself. The storm had been building all morning. By noon, the horizon was black, a rolling wall of dust and wind that swallowed everything in its path. Inside the operations tent, the air felt just as heavy, the kind of silence that comes before something no one wants to say out loud. Colonel Collins stood over the tactical map, eyes fixed on the red markers blinking across the screen. "Satellite confirms it," she said quietly. 200 civilians trapped in the river valley, insurgent forces moving in from the east, ETA 30 minutes. Rains leaned over the table. "We can get there before they do if we go now." "Not that simple," Collins replied. "Command wants our team redirected to secure an Allied convoy ambushed outside the same grid. That's our official priority." Sarah frowned. "Convoy?" "Intel truck carrying encrypted hardware," Collins said. "Strategic value high, but the valley," she looked at the red cluster of dots again. "If the insurgents reach those people first, there'll be a massacre." No one spoke. Rains broke the silence. "We can't split forces, we're already light." Lane checked his weapon, jaw tight. So what's it gonna be, save hardware or save people? Collins's voice hardened. Orders say convoy. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. Ma'am, with respect, those civilians won't last an hour. Half of them are children. Collins looked at her, steady, unreadable. I know. Sarah's throat went dry, then changed the order. I can't. You're Colonel Collins, they'll listen. Collins exhaled slowly. They don't listen to conscience, Lieutenant. They listen to objectives. The tent fell silent again. Outside, the storm wind howled, shaking the canvas walls. Finally, Collins said, wheels up in 10. Target, convoy site, let's move. They launched into the storm. Visibility dropped to near zero. The helicopter bucked in the turbulence, sand hammering the windows like rain. Sarah sat across from Rains, helmet pressed tight, every nerve alive. He looked at her as if reading her mind. Don't, he said quietly. Don't what? Don't make this about feelings. You've done enough saving for one lifetime. She met his eyes. Then maybe that's the only thing worth doing. Before he could reply, the pilot's voice cut through the noise. We're on final, LZ hot. They dropped hard, the landing gear skidding through loose rock. The back ramp opened and the storm slammed into them, a living thing of dust and sound. Move, Rains shouted. They disembarked into chaos. The convoy was already half destroyed, 2 trucks burning, smoke cutting through the brown haze. No movement except for the crackle of fire. Lane swept the perimeter. No friendlies, they're gone. Collins's voice came through comms. Confirm, intel truck. Destroyed. A beat of silence. Then Collins understood extraction in 5. Sarah stared at the wreckage, anger rising through the exhaustion. We came here for this. Through the haze she caught something, faint movement toward the valley. Not insurgents, not soldiers, a line of shapes running through the storm, civilians. Her heartbeat spiked. Rains, she pointed, they're right there. He followed her gaze. Too far, we can't reach them before the evac window. She keyed her mic. Command, this is Echo Medic. Civilians visible west of position, approximately 2 clicks. Collins's voice cut in, sharper this time. Stand down, Lieutenant. Sarah hesitated. Ma'am, they're moving into the open, if we leave now. Stand down. Rains caught her arm. You heard her. She pulled free. If we don't move, they die. Another explosion echoed from the valley, distant but real. Screams carried through the wind. Sarah turned toward the noise. Every part of her body screamed to move. Rains shook his head. Don't do it, Mitchell. She looked at him once, then ran. The storm swallowed her in seconds. Sand bit into her skin. The world became a blur of tan and gray. Her visor fogged, the wind ripping at her gear. She followed the screams, heart pounding, until shapes emerged through the haze. Dozens of civilians, huddled behind overturned carts, terrified faces turned skyward. Gunfire cracked from the ridge, insurgents closing fast. Sarah dove behind a broken wall, unshouldering her rifle. 3 quick bursts dropped the lead attackers. The rest scattered. Move, she shouted at the civilians. Follow me. They hesitated, frozen by fear. She ran to them, grabbing the nearest man by the arm, pushing him forward. Go, now. A woman clutched a child to her chest, eyes wide with disbelief. Who are you? Someone who isn't leaving you here. The child cried out as bullets struck the dirt nearby. Sarah turned, firing until her magazine clicked empty. Then a voice in her headset, Collins, tense but controlled. Lieutenant Mitchell, report. Sarah gasped into the mic. Civilians secure but under fire. Request immediate air support. A pause, then. You disobeyed a direct order. Copy that, Sarah said. Still need that air support. For a moment only static. Then Collins's voice returned, lower now. Coordinates. Sarah rattled them off, firing again as the insurgents regrouped. I'm low on ammo. We won't hold long. Hold, Collins said. We're coming. Minutes stretched into eternity. The wind screamed. The civilians clung to each other, eyes wide with terror. Sarah reloaded with shaking hands, every motion automatic. Then the sound came, faint at first, then growing, rotor blades cutting through the storm. The Black Hawk burst through the haze, engines straining against the wind. Its side door opened, Rains firing from the ramp, Lane covering the flank. Go, Sarah shouted, waving the civilians toward the landing zone. They ran, stumbling through the dust. The helicopter touched down hard, sand swirling in violent spirals. Sarah herded them aboard one by one, helping the injured, shoving others forward. A bullet grazed her shoulder. She didn't feel it until later. When the last child was inside, Rains yelled, "That's it, we're out of time." Sarah turned, still one figure in the distance. An old man, crawling, too weak to move. "Mitchell," Rains roared. She sprinted. Every instinct, every lesson, every ounce of discipline burned away. She reached the man, lifted him, carried him on her back toward the bird. Another explosion ripped the ground behind them. The shockwave threw her forward. She stumbled, dropped to one knee, then pushed again. Hands grabbed her, the team pulling both of them aboard as the helicopter lifted. The valley disappeared beneath them in a swirl of dust and fire. Inside, Sarah collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. The old man still clung to her arm, whispering something in Arabic, prayers, gratitude, maybe both. Rains sat opposite her, face half hidden behind his visor. "You're insane," he said, but his voice wasn't angry. Collins was silent in the cockpit. When they landed, command was waiting, officers in crisp uniforms, eyes cold. Sarah barely had time to step off the ramp before one of them barked, "Lieutenant Mitchell, you are relieved of operational duty pending inquiry for insubordination." Rains moved forward. "She saved 200 civilians." "Not your concern, Sergeant," the officer snapped. Collins stepped between them. "I'll handle this." The man hesitated, then nodded curtly. "You have 24 hours to submit your report." When he left, Collins turned to Sarah. "Walk with me." They moved away from the noise, toward the quiet edge of the runway where the wind carried only the sound of distant engines. For a long time, Collins said nothing. Then she turned, eyes fierce. "You made my job impossible today." Sarah didn't flinch. "Then court-martial me, but those people are alive." "You think I don't know that?" Collins snapped. Then her voice broke, softer now. "I knew what you'd do the moment you ran, and I covered you. You realize that, right? Command thinks I ordered the diversion." Sarah blinked. "You what?" Collins exhaled, the weight of it showing in her shoulders. Sometimes leadership isn't about following the right rule. It's about taking the right blame. The words hit her harder than any reprimand. "Ma'am, I—" "Save it," Collins's tone gentled. "I'll take the heat, but you need to decide who you are now. You can't keep saving the world by breaking every chain that holds it together." Sarah swallowed hard. "I just couldn't leave them." "I know," Collins said quietly. "That's why I don't regret covering for you." She paused. "But one day that mercy of yours will cost you something you can't replace. Be ready for that." The wind tore through the silence again. Sarah looked toward the horizon where the storm was finally breaking apart, sunlight spilling through like fire through smoke. "Maybe it's already cost me," she said softly. Collins studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then make it worth the price." That night, Sarah stood outside the barracks watching the stars return after the storm. The air smelled of dust and jet fuel and rain. Behind her, the base slept. Ahead of her, the desert stretched endless and dark. She thought about Holt, about the valley, about Collins taking blame for what wasn't hers. And she realized that mercy wasn't just something you gave. It was something you paid for. She whispered into the quiet, "I'll make it worth it." The wind carried her words away, and somewhere in the darkness, thunder rolled one last time before fading into silence. They said the war was ending. But in Sarah's world, wars never really ended. They just changed names. Months had passed since the storm in the valley. Official reports called it Operation Sandlight, classified success, unclassified silence. The 200 civilians she'd saved were listed as rescued by coalition forces. No mention of the medic who disobeyed orders. No mention of the colonel who took the blame. Sarah didn't mind. Some things weren't meant to be written down. Delta had changed too. Rains was gone, transferred to a leadership position stateside. Lane had left after an injury that wouldn't heal. The team felt smaller now. But the missions never stopped. Collins called her in one morning just after dawn. The colonel looked more tired than Sarah had ever seen her. Shadows under her eyes, coffee gone cold beside the stack of folders. "Sit," she said quietly. Sarah obeyed. "We're being sent into something different this time," Collins said. "A joint rescue and destruction op, remote research facility in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Hostiles have taken control of the site. Sensitive materials inside. We recover personnel, then destroy what's left." Sarah frowned. "Recover and destroy." "Exactly." Collins met her gaze. "There's a civilian scientist leading the project, Dr. Cameron Iqbal. He built something he shouldn't have, bioreactive tech with military potential. If the insurgents deploy it, it's mass casualty scale." Sarah's pulse quickened. "So we're going to save him." "We're going to save who we can." Collins's tone carried weight. "Command authorized destruction of the entire site if extraction fails." Sarah hesitated. "And if he refuses to leave?" Collins didn't answer right away. "Then we finish the job." The words hung heavy between them. Sarah stood, adjusting her gear. "Understood." Collins stopped her before she reached the door. "Mitchell, don't let your mercy get you killed." Sarah gave a small, sad smile. "You trained me too well for that, ma'am." They flew out that night. Dark skies, thin air, no sound except the blades and the low murmur of comms. As the mountains rose below, snow glimmered faintly in the moonlight. The pilot's voice came through, approaching drop point. The team rappelled into the cold, wind biting through their uniforms. The facility lay half buried in the cliffs ahead, steel doors blown open, smoke curling upward like the breath of something dying. Rains wasn't there this time. No Holt. Just Sarah, Lane, and 3 newer operators who looked too young for the weight on their shoulders. "Echo 1 move," Lane said quietly. They entered through the main access tunnel. Inside, the air smelled of metal and fire. Broken lights flickered along the walls. Bodies littered the hallway, guards, insurgents, scientists. The silence was worse than the noise. Sarah's boots crunched over glass as they advanced. Her heart hammered, steady but heavy. She kept her rifle ready, senses tuned to every sound. They reached the central lab after 15 minutes of silence. The door was sealed from the inside. Lane set charges. A muffled explosion, then the door gave way. Inside, amid shattered equipment, a single man sat against a console. Dr. Cameron Iqbal. Early 50s, beard streaked with gray, lab coat smeared with blood. When he saw them, he raised his hand slowly. "You're late." Sarah moved incautiously. "We're here to get you out." He shook his head. "You can't. They've already activated the containment breach. If I leave, this place will spread death." Lane scanned the consoles. "Is there a way to shut it down remotely?" Iqbal nodded toward the far side of the room. "Manual override, but the system's unstable. The person who stays behind won't leave alive." Silence filled the lab. One of the young operators muttered, "We're not dying for a machine." Sarah looked at Iqbal. "What happens if we destroy the lab instead?" "Then you release what's inside faster." He met her eyes. "Someone has to seal it from within." She felt the chill of inevitability crawl up her spine. Every mission had a moment like this, when someone realized the line between survival and sacrifice. Collins's voice crackled over the comms. Status echo. Lane keyed the mic. We found Iqbal, facility compromised. He says containment breach requires manual shutdown. Confirm, Collins said sharply. Manual. Yes, ma'am. A pause, then. You have 5 minutes to extract and destroy, no more. Iqbal smiled faintly. She doesn't know what that means. Sarah did. It meant leave him and finish the job. She turned to the team. Get ready to exfil. Lane stared at her. What are you doing? She looked at Iqbal. Show me the override. No, Lane said flatly. You're not doing this. Sarah met his eyes. We can't kill hundreds to save 5. And what about you? She smiled faintly. I stopped counting a long time ago. Lane cursed under his breath. Damn it, Mitchell. But she was already moving. Iqbal led her to a control panel sparking with electricity. Once you pull the final lever, the door locks, automatic seal. Sarah nodded. How long until total containment? 3 minutes. She keyed her comm. Echo to command, beginning shutdown sequence. Collins's voice snapped through. Mitchell, that's not your order. Doesn't matter. Stand down. I can't. Silence, then Collins again, voice softer now raw. Don't you do this, Mitchell. Sarah looked at the scientist, then at the team waiting near the exit. Go, she said quietly. That's an order. Lane hesitated, jaw clenched. Then he saluted once, the sharp, painful kind that says everything words can't, and dragged the others toward the exit. Sarah turned back to the console. Sparks danced across the panels, the air heavy with heat and smoke. Iqbal stood beside her. You don't have to. I do. He nodded slowly. Then may your mercy find peace. She pulled the first switch. Warning lights flared red. The floor shook. Step away, Lane's voice shouted over comms. Sarah smiled through tears. Tell Collins she was right, mercy costs. Then she pulled the final lever. The doors slammed shut, sealing the room. The hum of the containment core deepened, the glow intensifying until it filled the lab with white light. Iqbal closed his eyes. It's done. Sarah took one last breath, the air thick with smoke and memory. Her thoughts weren't of fear or pain. They were of Holt's laughter, of Rains shouting across a firefight, of Collins watching from the catwalk, silent but proud. And then peace. Outside, the mountain rumbled. Lane and the others watched from a distance as the facility collapsed inward, the explosion muffled, contained. Collins's voice came through the static, tight with emotion. Echo team, report. Lane's voice cracked. Containment secure, but she didn't make it. The silence that followed was long, endless. When the dust settled, the mountain was quiet again. 3 weeks later at Fort Bragg, a small ceremony took place behind closed doors. No cameras, no speeches, just a folded flag and a single medic's patch placed on a table. Collins stood beside it, unreadable, her hands clasped behind her back. Rains was there too, walking with a cane. Lane stood at attention, jaw tight, eyes glistening. Collins spoke finally, voice low. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, medic, operator, soldier. She never asked for recognition and she won't get it. But every life she touched, everyone she refused to leave behind, will remember her. She paused, looking down at the patch. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is care when everyone else has stopped trying. She placed her hand on the table, fingers resting lightly on the fabric. She cared until the end. That night Collins sat alone in her office. The base was quiet, the corridors dim. She poured a small cup of coffee, untouched. She took out the last thing Sarah had sent before the final mission. A short, handwritten note, folded once, edges smudged. It read, If this reaches you, ma'am, it means I didn't come back. Don't let them call it disobedience. It wasn't that. It was belief. Someone has to remember that mercy still belongs in war. You taught me that. Thank you for never asking me to be less than who I am. Mitchell. Collins closed her eyes, the paper trembling in her hands. She whispered into the empty room, "You were never less, Sarah. You were more." Outside, dawn broke over the airfield. The world moved on. Missions continued. Planes took off. Orders were given, and somewhere another medic checked her gear before stepping into the unknown. But for those who had known her, something lingered, an echo that wouldn't fade. Because Sarah Mitchell's story wasn't about victory or fame. It was about the quiet courage that lives between breaths, between decisions, between one heartbeat and the next. And in that silence, where mercy met duty and refused to break, her legacy endured. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.